Hi, my name is Naomi Weinstein, and welcome to Workforce Priorities, which is a webinar series, six-part webinar series on how to attract, hire, and retain the right people for today's behavioral health world. This is part of a larger series on workforce priorities. This will include, we have a webinar that was released about 2 weeks ago on using human resources strategically. We have future offerings on organizational culture, performance management, and employee engagement. There'll be some supplemental resources released as well. So today, next slide. Okay, today we're going to be talking about getting the right people in the door. We have with us Glenn Karunis, who is an independent consultant with a long history of work as a senior human resources professional in healthcare settings. And we also have Edie Schwartz, who is a recovery champion extraordinaire, consultant, and former executive director of Putnam Family Community Services, which is now called Cove Care. Next slide. Today, we're going to be talking about workforce planning and talent acquisition as part of how to achieve our competitive advantage. And I'm going to just turn it over to Glenn. Hi, Glenn.
Oh, hey, Naomi. Hey, thank you. Edie, great to be here with you today, and everybody else out there, great to be with you today as well. As Naomi said, my background is in human resources, spent the majority of that time in healthcare. I spent a good amount of time as the chief HR officer at a number of different places, and hopefully I can, pass some of that information, knowledge, and experience on to you today. So some of you may have been involved in the previous session that we did a few weeks ago that Naomi referred to. One of the key things that we're trying to get across here is how important it is to understand the role of strategic HR and the different elements that flow from that. And we've started off the last session, I'll start off today's session too, with a key question. And that is, does the organization that you work for have a culture to ensure that the right people with the right skills are doing the right things in the jobs that are important for executing the organization's strategy? That's kind of the overall umbrella for a lot of what we'll be talking about both today when we really hone in on the piece on workforce planning and talent acquisition, but in this whole series where we're really talking about culture and process and getting the right people in the door and managing them appropriately and then engaging them appropriately. All of those have to do with the culture and making sure you have the right people doing the right things that really align with your organization's strategy. And that's a key piece that we're going to constantly be emphasizing throughout the course of this webinar. So next slide. So one of the most important things that you can have in your organization is getting the employees that conform with your cultural fit. So you're trying to find employees that fit with the culture that you've either created or you're trying to create. So, the founder of Zappos, Tony Zia, said your company's culture and your company's brand are really two sides of the same coin. Basically, your culture is your brand. So here you can see the culture, the organization environment, how you do things in your organization is your employment brand in its truest form. You really have to try to figure out how do employees feel they fit and identify within your organization. And then, to really emphasize some of the things we're going to be talking about today, and that is, will a newly recruited employee be productive in this environment? And that's some of the key things you're going to be thinking about when you're doing your workforce planning and then honing in on getting the right people in the door. Do we have a culture that people really want to work in? So, what is our brand? What is our reputation? What kinds of things can we offer to people to work here? And basically all that flows into what I call your value proposition. Your value proposition is what your brand is, what you can offer to your employees, to the community that makes you unique, that makes you different. It kind of answers the question, why do I want to work here? What's the value that we offer to you that you're going to gain by coming here, and that we can offer the great skills you bring to our clients? Next slide. So, you start off with your brand. And your brand is going to inform your recruitment, advertising, and your sourcing. So that brand, that reputation, that value proposition that you have out there in the community is going to be really important because it's going to say a lot about you. It's going to inform the public on what your culture and your value proposition is. So, one of the things you have to ask yourself in terms of sourcing and how you're going to advertise, how you're going to brand yourself is, where do we find certain kinds of employees? And, there's going to be a strata. There's going to be certain people that come directly from your immediate community. And there's going to be some that you're going to have to go out in concentric circles to find. So how do you find them? Well, one key piece, especially if you have really good people, is internal postings and employer referrals. So what kind of system do you have to allow for internal movement, transfers, and promotions? Do you have an opportunity to get input from your employees on who they think really may work well here, who would fit into this culture? What people have I worked with in other places that would really work well here? You have ads and social media, both emphasizing your brand as well as looking for specific jobs. I'm sure many of you have seen, posts on social media that says we're hiring, and they might have a couple of different jobs that they're looking for. More focused internet listings, certainly the key ones that I've used, and I think many of us use, are Indeed, LinkedIn, but there were others as well. And then there were more specific ones. For example, with me being an HR person, if I was looking for a higher level HR person, I might want to advertise in the Society of Human Resources Management, or SHRM, and they have job listings. So you'll know best where you can focus some of that sourcing with websites. Colleges, universities, high schools, wow, they are a key, what I call pipeline for your people. So you begin to hire graduates. You develop a relationship with some of these schools. They know that you're a good organization. They know that they've had success placing some of their graduates there. If you can start that pipeline and get that regular positions flowing back and forth, you'll be in great shape. I've done this in a couple of different places that I've worked at, and when you can develop those relationships, it's terrific. Job fairs where you've set up with yourself or as part of other employers that are going to draw people to your particular industry. And you get a lot of new graduates or people that have been that are looking for new opportunities. That's a great place to speak to your brand and your value proposition. For higher level positions, you might be looking at outside recruiting agencies. We all have experienced folks that we call headhunters. Depending upon the role, that may be an important source for your talent. And then community connections. So it's who do you know within your community, within your organization. Let me just say that the community connections are really, really important. But just to do somebody a favor without really knowing what kind of quality you're getting, I just caution you that community connections are really important, but you have to know who those connections are and whether or not they're going to send you solid people. Next. So look, you got to find talent, searching high and low, searching just about everywhere, because finding talent is not easy. And when I say talent, you can find people that will fill your spots, but it's really the talented people, the people with the skills and abilities that you're looking for, that you're trying to make sure that are within your organization and constantly looking to improve on that. Next slide. So, you really have to plan. It's really important to plan. If you don't, work your plan, if you fail, what do they say? The famous saying, if you don't fail to plan, you plan to fail. So you really have to look at all of the different elements of getting the right people in the door, finding the talent. You have to look at what you have versus what you need. So it's really a supply and demand type of thing. So, you're really looking at various elements of the talent acquisition process: recruitment, interviewing, who the candidates are, what the jobs are, what their resumes look like, what the requirements are, where are you going to search, and what skills that talent pool has. Next slide. So again, got a plan, all right? This is something that, a lot of us probably don't do enough of, but it's really worth taking that step back and really doing that forecast to take a look at your supply and demand and, look at both your current and try to project out and look at what your future needs might be. So I've kind of put it into 3 boxes here, 3 categories with questions that you might want to ask yourself. There is no one size fits all. There's certain parameters that we're trying to put together in this whole series to make sure that we're asking the questions that you need to answer. So the staff we had versus the staff we need. So first you're looking at the kind of highest level. What does our table of organization look like? What does our structure look like? Which staff do we have who are our best people? What kind of profile of the types of best people do we want to bring in here to join our organization? So we have the type of people that fit into the culture. What types of jobs or people do we need? So, is it just a matter of, a social worker leaves or a peer specialist leaves? Are you going to just fill it with the same type of position? You have to constantly look at what are the changing needs of our client base and, do we just automatically replace, or should we look down the road to say, hey, what might we need, and maybe we need something a little different? The skills and approach that we really want. What are we going to look for in all of our jobs? What is our value system? What is our mission? What are we going to look for in each and every one of the people that fills our roles? What skills do we look for in those specific roles? So I'm going to talk in a few minutes about hard versus soft skills, and there's a distinction between both of them, and you really have to look at. My argument is going to be, you really have to look at both of those different types of skills, and how do we ensure the person actually fits into our culture, and that really involves asking the right questions during the interview process, and also doing a pretty hard assessment when the person initially joins your organization. And then assessing your labor supply. Who's already here? Who's out there? And where could we find them? So it's really saying, okay, I know there are some great schools in our areas that have social work programs. Should we look there for our social workers? Should we look there for our social work assistants? Okay, and then, hey, the big question, how do we get them to come here? What are we going to do in recruitment? And then that really looks at your entire HR process. What are we going to pay? How do we fit ourselves within certain benefits? Are we going to offer tuition reimbursement? I mean, so all of these things go to your value proposition over and above your culture. But I think we all agree that culture is one of the key things. Next slide. Edie, I think you're going to take it away.
About for healthcare professionals, what this means, what Glenn's been talking about, which is so very important. How do we actually integrate that into our own system? And I think that the most important piece for us, so there's a lot of important pieces for us, but it's this making sure that the talent we find, that the culture we set up, that all of the things that Glenn just brought to the forefront really encompass our overriding beliefs in recovery, integrated health, trauma-informed and person-centered practice. And all of that comes within that bubble of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we want the talent that Greg's talking about, the talent that we're bringing in, to actually practice in a way that's going to promote these approaches throughout our entire organization. Next slide, please. So taking what Glenn said again and thinking about it for a behavioral health organization that has been transformed or is in the middle of transforming to one that has all those pieces that we just talked about, what is it that we're looking for? And what we're looking for is a reflection of not only who we are and what we believe in, but who we serve and where we sit. And that's why culture becomes so important. Do we have a culture that's supporting the kinds of folks who want to walk into this organization? And those folks are people who are a reflection of the community around us. Is there diversity on every level of our organization, including the C-suite? Do we look at our organization and do we see only folks who reflect the diversity of our community in direct practice? Or do we see it throughout our entire organization? And are we seeking the kind of person who can really provide the kinds of practice that we're looking for? So we're looking for folks with these hard and soft skills that Glenn's going to go over, and someone who's really comfortable with change and flexibility and challenges, and people who've had experiences with these kinds of situations. Next slide. So what's most important for us is not only getting the talent, but getting the right talent. And this is really just kind of an overview, which both Glenn and I are going to go into in a lot more detail. But the most important piece for our transformative system, for our system that's diverse and equitable and recovery focused and integrated, the most important people are those who have knowledge and competency in the practice areas that we deem most important. So if we feel it's really important for people to practice in a certain way, we're not going to bring in people with talent in a different arena. We're going to bring in people with knowledge and competency in that arena. More important than that, really, is that these people are going to be flexible and open to learning new skills. Because, you can learn how to do something. You can learn trauma-informed practice. You can learn recovery-focused practice. You can learn integrated health. But if you're not flexible to be able to learn, you can't learn anything. And so I'm sure you all have had some staff who just feel like they've been trained in something and this is what they do. And they're not willing to do it a different way. So you're going to hear me talk about flexibility over and over again. One of the ways to know that you're having somebody who's flexible and that has knowledge and competency is to be clear about your expectations. So be really clear in the job interview and even before in the job description in everything you talk about what you're expecting of the person. Because if you haven't been clear about what you're expecting of the person, you cannot then get angry at them for not giving it to you. Doesn't work that way. And you want to make sure that you're flexible. You're asking for flexibility. You be flexible about qualifications. Some of your stuff may require certain professional degrees because of our funders, but others do not. Be flexible about the range of qualifications and education and experience. And again, later on, we're going to be talking about organizational culture, so this is just a little tease. But always, always be looking to your organizational culture. Because if you bring in someone who can't be comfortable and caring and feel supported and that change is possible within your organization, they're not going to be able to do what you need them to do. Next slide.
Okay, thanks, Edie. Those are really important things to keep in mind. Making sure you're finding in the right people flexibility. But then it's important that the employer, in looking for those people, is really clear about what it is that you're seeking. So, the traditional employer is seeking people with, what I would call hard skills. Edie referred to hard versus soft skills, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit. So what employers typically seek? Well, a solid resume, great experience, looking at the previous organizations the person has worked in, what kind of schooling they've had. You always want to look at job stability, how they've gone through their various progression, and looking really specifically for those job-related skills. All right, skills and competencies are really important. But when I get to the next slide, you're going to see that there's a little more broad definition. This is really what your traditional employers will look at. They'll look at the resume. Hey, this person looks good. They've been in these roles. They've done that job before. Wow, they're terrific. This is what I want. Next slide. But what I think is important to really understand is there are two sides of the coin. Now you're really going to have to figure out, as Edie said, and as I said earlier, what your culture is. You have to really define that to know what you need first. But typically, as I said, employers look at hard skills. Those are those specific and quantifiable knowledge or abilities, whether or not they have an MS, whether or not they have been in specific roles, whether or not they've done a specific job before, whether or not that they have, for example, the specific computer skills that you need. What I think is really important, and I think employers have to focus a lot more on, is the so-called soft skills. Now, soft skills for years have always gotten sort of a bad rap that, you really can't put your finger on them because they're subjective rather than objective. But, there are ways to get at that. And, even though they're unquantifiable, I think we would all agree that they're really the key things that are going to make or break the employees that come into your organization. They're going to determine whether or not they're flexible enough to be able to adapt to your situation, because no two organizations are the same, at least in my experience. Everyone has something that makes them unique. So you're going to look at how people communicate, how they've worked in teams, what kind of leaders have they been, how flexible are they, how creative are they, and a lot of that you're going to get to through the questions that you ask and the observations you make when the person first comes on and starts to work for you. Next slide. So here are just some examples of soft skills. So when we talk about skills and competencies, you really have to expand your thinking to look beyond just the resume and where they've gone to school and what jobs have they had in the past. You really have to look at this array of skills, and not only the personal skills like how motivated do you think they are, how disciplined do you think they are, how resilient, but how empathetic. That really goes to a lot of flexibility. How are they at receiving criticism, or as I call it, constructive feedback? How good a team player are they? How are they at dealing with problem solving? So really the thinking has to be expanded well beyond what does the resume look like to really what does the person bring to the table and how are they going to fit here. Next slide. So what about the interview? All right. One of the key pieces, I look at an interview as a conversation with a purpose, or a conversation with a plan. So you really have to think about the interview as trying to get a pretty good feel for what that person is like. Next slide. So, you always have at least two parties to the interview. One is the employer. So you as the employer, you're going to look at the best person for the job, right? Can the candidate do the job? How will the candidate fit into the organization? And if you can't find the perfect candidate, are they flexible enough, as Edie talked about? Are they flexible enough or trainable enough to be able to do the job or a job within your organization? So if they're not perfect, and I have a great example of that. I had interviewed somebody several years ago for a human resources job. They did not have a human resources background. In fact, they had an MS in social work, and I was looking at qualities and skills, soft skills. What would make a person in HR succeed? Well, I wound up taking a chance. I hired that person. He is now a vice president in an organization. So, I kind of pat myself on the back. At the same time, look, we've all made mistakes. And I'll get into that in a little bit later. I was looking for an employee relations job, and I said, you know what? Wow, it would be great to have a lawyer in that role. So I hired a lawyer. Turns out that even though they had the great resume and the legal background, they just didn't fit into the organization. Frankly, I eventually, when I had an opportunity to do a layoff, they were one of the first people that I let go because it just wasn't working out. But at the same time, you're always looking at the candidate. What's the candidate looking for? This is always a two-way street. The candidate's looking at you. What can I offer? What has the position offered me? And how does this position fit into my complete career plans? Look, don't force it. If there's not a match, keep on trying. I found that a lot of employers get really desperate and don't want to and feel and start to freak out when they don't have somebody in a spot. I'm telling you from experience. I think Edie will tell you this too. Don't hire the wrong person just because you think that they have the resume to fill the spot. Keep on looking, keep on trying. Next slide.
Glenn, let me just throw something in here. I was muted before when I was trying to do so.
Okay.
Back on your, back on what you just said, I think that's why the hard skills and soft skills are so important. Because what happens is sometimes we're just so nervous that we're bringing somebody on board, as Glenn mentioned, but we're bringing them on because their resume looks good and the hard skills are there. But what's most important when you're trying to transform your system into any one of these new practice modes that we are really, all of us, trying to move towards, it's the soft skills. It's the flexibility, the ability to look at themselves, the ability to take good constructive criticism, the ability to think a different way. Those are the kinds of things that will make it or break it for you. And so when we go back and say, well, they went to a great social work school and they've been working at this clinic for 100 years and no one's complained about them, that's not good enough. It's those soft skills that are really going to demonstrate for you the person who can really move with you to this transformative system. And we will talk more about how you figure that out.
I agree. That's a great point, Edie. And, I couldn't have said it better myself. You're really looking for the person who's going to grow with you and who's going to really be flexible enough to fit into your culture. And guess what? We'll talk about this in the next session. But you know what? Your culture changes. Your culture shifts. There might be some foundations to it, but you're going to need people that are going to be able to shift with that. So it's important to get those people with the soft skills to be able to go there with you. So anyway, back to this. It's really important that you plan. Just don't go into an interview off the seat of your pants. You got to prepare the questions to get at what you want. So, and I'll get into a little bit when I get into the slides that are coming up, the types of questions that I think are going to get at what you're looking for. Again, making them really, it's called behavioral or situationally based. Make at least some of the questions relatively standardized so you have something to compare various candidates to. Knowing what the competencies, what skills should the questions that I'm going to ask during this interview elicit. So what I'm going to present to you is the more open-ended, the better. And then who? What a concept. Wouldn't it be great to have not just you have to make that decision? Now, you certainly, if you're the hiring manager or if you're the person who's running the organization and you want to have everybody make sure they interview with you, you'll ultimately make the final decision. But I'm going to propose to you that you get a lot more broader array of people who interview because certain things certain rapport may elicit different kinds of responses, and you're going to want that broad swath of input into making sure you're hiring the person who's going to fit into your organization. Next slide. So, one of the key things is asking behavioral interview questions. You're asking about past experiences in jobs is the best predictor of future success. Now, there are circumstances where you're going to ask kind of future-oriented questions. What would you do if? I think they're okay, but it's really much more important to ask experience-based, open-ended questions. So it's, tell me about the time when you, and then, you fill in the blank and just let them talk. And frankly, one of the things that I always like to include as a tip is, you know what? It's okay to be quiet because sometimes that'll elicit more. Or if you just do I've had many circumstances where, people get nervous and they want to kind of jump in and help the applicant. Don't do that because it may not, you may move them in a different direction and not really get at what you're looking for. So silence or sometimes asking a question again or in a little different way is really helpful to getting to the right person. Next slide. So, again, you have to prepare. So getting to those skills that you're looking for in the job, designing questions that will elicit evidence of those skills, and again, asking those open-ended questions. So as an example, these are really generic. Teamwork. Tell me about a project you work on. What? Oh, really? What problems arose, and how did you deal with them? So, communication. If you're looking for somebody who's going to fit well into a team, who's going to be persuasive, tell me about a time when you really had to persuade other people to come around to your point of view. One question I always ask, I don't care who it is, from the highest to the most basic entry levels, I always ask a customer service question because I want to know how people are going to interact with others. So tell me about a time when you had to deal with somebody who was difficult, or tell me about a time that you had a really challenging situation with a client or a customer. How did you handle it? That's going to tell you an awful lot about that person, what skills, especially what soft skills they have to really get at the answering the question. Is this person going to be a good fit? Is this person going to be flexible enough? And is this person going to be the kind of person that you really want to hire here at our organization? And now I'm going to turn it over to Edie to talk a little bit more in detail about cultural fit.
Thanks, Glenn. Next slide, please. So let's just summarize a little bit about these great things that Glenn talked about, and then talk about how to bring it home for us. So we want to make sure that we have the right people in the room. Glenn mentioned this, doing the interviewing. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later because it's the particular job you're filling and the culture of your organization that would determine who the right interviewers will be. And there are all kinds of opportunities for who the right interviewers would be. It wouldn't be, it's not necessarily just the program people or just the HR. It might be an array. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So we want to make sure we have the right people, that they're asking the right questions, that you're paying attention, and Glenn just pointed to this, not only to what they say, but what they don't say, and when they start to squirm, and when they look comfortable, and when they don't look comfortable. I am a social worker. It's hard for me to avoid that, but the verbal and the nonverbal are equally important. And so keep an eye to that, and make sure, as Glenn said, that you're getting into what did you do when. And again, we're going to talk about what those questions will look like, because you want to get at what they believe in. I'm going to repeat what I said before because it is incredibly important. Knowledge is something that can be learned, but beliefs are hard to change. And so it's okay to hire someone who never heard of person-centered planning and recovery-focused organizations, because they can learn how to change their practice if they believe that that's something that is a good thing to do and they're flexible in doing it. All right? And that last one we're going to talk about more as we move forward. But in a recovery-focused organization, it's really important that you see how the applicant interacts with the participant. It's actually important in anything that you do. It's around customer service. But in our work, it's really, really the most important issue, because that is our product, how the human being who's coming for services gets them and perceives them and helps to get them on their recovery journey. Next slide, please. So there is a supplemental resource guide that we put together that goes into great depth on these things that I'm just going to point to for the next few slides. And that will be coming out, Tara tells me, when the slides are posted and the recording is posted. So in 2 or 3 days, take a look on the MCTAC website for the supplemental resource on getting the right people in the door. It is many pages worth of the exact questions you can ask, what you should be looking for, and I'm just going to summarize it for you here today with the time that we have left. So be on the lookout for the person's belief system. And of these things, I'm not, for time, I'm not going to go through them all. You have them, and you'll have them in the slides. But the most important piece here is the belief that every human being can get better, even though they have serious challenges. It's that everyone can recover. And there are questions to ask to get at that. And there's practice to look at to get at that. And it's in the supplemental resource, and we're going to go over it a little bit. You want to get someone who believes that everybody can be an active member of their community, that everyone can go to the library, can meet someone and be married, have a child if they want to, have relationships with family and friends, have a satisfied life, that people are not targeted to live a life of illness, that you want to be on the lookout for people who believe that everyone can live a life of fullness, and that they're flexible and open to thinking about this way of doing things. Because, I know that I'm old and I went to school a long time ago, but I was not taught in social work school, and I don't think it's terribly different these days that absolutely everyone can live this full life. And I think that we need to begin to understand that every human being deserves and can live a life of success and satisfaction. Next slide, please. So here's some things to ask. All right, these are just a couple of questions to ask. You could say, what kind of goals do you believe different kinds of service participants can set? If people are going to give you answers like symptom management, medication compliance, that's not the same as getting a job, having a child, making Thanksgiving dinner, dating, having my own home. There's a difference there, and you have to sort of tease out that recovery-related question. Also, you could really sort of ask about someone, share with me the likelihood of recovery for some of the participants you've worked with. And you want to listen for even the person who they might meet who has had, 15 relapses, is on the 16th time entering recovery and going to live a sober life. And do they share with you that all of those people have a likelihood of recovery? And also ask questions about how have you helped people you work with become more involved in their community? And you might hear things like, well, I set up a book club in my program because people aren't comfortable out in the community, and I really wanted them to experience a book club. That doesn't say to you that every single person can experience the book club at the library or with their friends. So here are a few questions. There are many, many more in the resource, in the supplemental resource. And next slide. And then you want to delve a little bit deeper into what we're talking about. If you're comfortable, not everyone's comfortable with these, but look at these kinds of questions. How might recovery show itself in your practice? They don't have to have an answer. There's no right answer. Someone is going to show you the kind of practice that they do that would help someone on their recovery journey. This question about challenges in your past jobs, that really is very telling to you. Challenges in your past jobs tell someone what scares them, what scares the applicant, what are they not able to really be flexible about and move past. Or they might share with you a big challenge that they were able to overcome and move past. So that's an important question. Also, I know that this is controversial, but let's face it, we go into this field, and all of you who are out there, you can't answer me. However, I want you to think about this. Why don't we go into a field where we work really hard. We get paid less than in other fields. Why? Because we want to give back. And most of us have had some experience with the world that has been less than wonderful. And what we want to do is create a world that's really better than the world maybe that was created for us. And that is a huge piece of us. So whether we disclose that we have our own issues with recovery or trauma, or racism or health inequity, it's there. And so asking someone, would you ever use self-disclosure in your practice? Because we were taught as therapists not to, but that changed 20 years ago. And so is someone up on how they use themselves to move forward? It's a very, very telling question. Next slide, please. And then you want to look not just at the knowledge, because I've said this a number of times. You want to look at the person's practice. How do they feel with people being involved in their own treatment, their own services? How do they use that lived experience, and do they understand it? Look for language that might be stigmatizing or hints of shame. Because if there are any kind of hints of the applicant's own shame or feelings of shame, then they're not going to be able to get rid of stigma and shame and deal with the stigma and shame of the client. And stigmatizing language are things like calling someone by their diagnostic criteria. You know, they're schizophrenics and therefore they're bipolars. You know, they are borderlines and that's why everyone is doing this kind of thing. You know, they're alcoholics and addicts and they're not going to get better. So watch for that language coming through. Again, I want to point out that this supplemental resource has some very specific questions you can ask and some very specific answers and behaviors that you can look for as you're interviewing. Next slide. And I just want to say that what I'm pointing out is exactly what Glenn said. I'm really repeating what he's saying, but I'm putting it in our language because Glenn's points about hard and soft skills, about the right fit, about the culture, about the flexibility, all of those things are what I'm talking about here in the language of recovery-oriented service systems. So here comes the slide with a little bit deeper dive into this, our McTack favorite word, which is if you're ready to really put yourself on the line and really jump in with trying to find out someone's practice orientation, observe their comfort level with the relationship between practitioner and participant. That's really the heart of a recovery practice. There are not two experts in the room. I mean, there are two experts in the room, excuse me. There's not one expert in the room. The participant is expert in what they need and what's best for them. And the practitioner, the applicant, is expert in how to help them get there. And take a look at that relationship and explore them. The other thing that you could do is get input from the people who the applicant will be working for. Start to see, have an applicant come into the interview process if you're ready. Bring them into it. Have them be a part of things. Look for the participant, look for the applicant's flexibility as you bring in a participant into the interview or you begin to ask these kind of deep and different questions. And remember the nonverbal. Look at the comfort level. See what is not just coming out of their mouth, but how they're feeling with you delving into these issues. Next. Next slide. And just to kind of sum up for me, you want to hire and encourage staff who are flexible, willing to change, open to learning, willing to look at new ways of doing things, because you want to remember that the staff are your most important asset. They are the thing that costs us the most money in our organizations and their most important piece. And this last one, I can't say it enough times. we need to believe in every human being's ability to grow and change. Every human being. And we get that by asking these questions and by looking at how people respond. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to begin to wrap up our presentation and listen to you folks for some questions.
Sounds great. Thanks, Edie. And you raised a lot of really great points, especially the one about asking about their comfort level in past jobs. That'll really reveal a lot about whether or not they can be flexible enough, or whether or not they'll actually fit into your particular culture. But anyway, all right, so you've done all the right things. You've planned, you've interviewed, you've asked the right questions. You finally got the person on board. Now you've got some new people working with you, but it doesn't quite stop there. I always like to think of onboarding as really the last step in the hiring process. So, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So here's somebody who's joining your organization, and it's their opportunity to introduce themselves to you, and you introducing yourselves to them. So it's that opportunity to introduce all the culture and policies and practices. And I used to try to emphasize when I was a chief HR officer of making the onboarding process more of an enculturating process, as opposed to just hitting them with policies and procedures. It was really, what is this organization about? How can I introduce people who can talk about what the organization is about, and ensuring that I'm putting my best foot forward as an organization to get people to feel comfortable right away. And frankly, it'll also determine while you go through this process if more help is needed, whether or not you have to do something a little bit different with your onboarding process, or if there's something that's lacking in the candidate, but maybe there's a little bit more training required. So once you got them on board, don't just say, okay, great, here's the policy manual, go read it, and now you're going to start, on day 3. You really have to develop some kind of a process when you're going to enculturate the new hires to your organization. Next slide. So I know what you're asking. We've all done it. What if I make a mistake? As I said, we've all done it. I gave you an example before where I absolutely said I was going to hire a lawyer, and I did, and it turned out the person was the wrong fit. So what do? Well, yeah, that's what you have your probationary period for, or your introductory period, whatever you call it in your organization. It'll give you an opportunity, usually 60 or 90 or 6 months, to assess quickly and to make that judgment as to whether or not they should be there. Is more or different training required, as I said before? Can the employee adjust, or should we just move on? Maybe they're not the right fit, and this is a good time to make that break. Sometimes you find that a person isn't a fit for the particular role for what you've hired them for, but can they fit somewhere else in the organization? So this is the time you're going to make that judgment. You got to make a decision on the person. Don't waffle. Don't just say, oh, I'll let it pass, because then you've certainly set yourself up for where the person is more part of your organization. And if it is the wrong decision, it makes it difficult both for you and for them. Okay, so next slide.
Before we move off of this, Glenn, I'm just going to
Okay.
put my 2 cents in, which is just to repeat what you said, which is that we all make mistakes. Hiring is not a science; it's an art, and it's all about the things that we put in today, and you do your best at it, and you still can make an error. So I just wanted to agree with you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Edie. And look, we've all done it. We can all probably think of examples where we have done it. It's just a matter of adjusting. Do we need more time to assess this person? Is this person maybe the wrong person, and we have to move on and we have to let them go? Or can we maybe extend this period of time or find another spot for them? But you've got to make a decision one way or the other. Don't waffle. Don't just, kind of do this on a half-baked way. Make a decision and decide where that person's going to go. Okay, last slide. Bringing it all home now. So, it's all about the process. It's about developing that plan. It's the the supply and demand. It's what you have versus what you need, and then what's out there. Make sure you have a good, sensible recruitment process. Use your brand and focus on your culture. Looking for those hard and soft skills that are going to fit into what it is that makes your organization unique. Make sure you have that interview strategy where you're using multiple people. You're asking a lot of those open-ended questions to try to get at what it is really that you're looking for. Make sure you're onboarding well. Again, never get a second chance to make a first impression. Assess that person quickly and adjust. And then, in essence, this is a quality process. So you're going to look at the process, say what worked well, what didn't work well, and adjust each time. Maybe I have to ask different questions. Maybe I keep hiring the same kinds of wrong people. Maybe, wow, I'm really hiring a lot of the right people. Let's make sure that we have everybody using this same process. So it's a constant way of looking back, assessing. Ultimately, it's about getting the right people to make your organization successful. And I thank you, and I guess now we'll take some questions.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So we had a couple of questions here. The first one I want to pose is something that I've definitely seen in my own work in direct care organizations. And that's the reality that most of the time, not most of the time, many times when we are hiring under intense time pressures and intense funding constraints. So what do we prioritize, given that we may not have the luxury of turning everyone down because they're not fitting the precise things that we're looking for? How do we prioritize stuff?
Let me just take that first, and then Edie, you can jump in. I've faced this many times, and in healthcare, we're always under time constraints, and we're always under financial constraints. You still need to hire the right person that has the right skills for your role. And it's not just the person who happens to check off the boxes. They have an MS, they're a social worker, they're breathing, bring them on. It's got to be a combination of what are you looking in your organization? Will this person actually fit into our culture? And you know what? Don't just hire that first person, because we've all done that too. We've said, oh gosh, this person's coming through the door. They check off a couple of the boxes that we need. We're frustrated. People are yelling that we're short-staffed. We've got to get them in. In many cases, that's where you do make the mistakes. So if you do make that mistake, assess quickly. But, I guess, when you get enough experience with this stuff, trust your gut. If you're saying that person isn't the right person, they're probably not the right person. Move on and try to find somebody else.
Yeah, I would say that, having been in direct practice myself, I agree with you, Naomi. And any time that I rushed to hire someone who wasn't the right fit, I regretted it later, because the end result of our work is not widgets, it's human beings. And they deserve to have someone working with them that can actually help them get to where they need to go. So, I live in a rural area that's just an hour from New York City. And as a result of that, it's not easy to find doctors. And when I had a doctor vacancy, especially a child psychiatrist, I was gripped with fear, because it's dangerous and you have no one to treat people. And you know what? We got creative about what to do till we found the right person. Once we got a temp. Another time we did a contract with the local hospital temporarily to get some psychiatrists to do some extra work. So I think that we need to, it's not so much about prioritizing, because the priority is getting the right person in. It's about being creative, about filling that slot on a temporary basis until you can find the right person, because you're going to regret it if you get the wrong one.
Okay. And last question in the 1 minute we have, or 2 minutes we have, we've talked a lot about how to talk about people's about direct practice staff who are doing the work. But what about the admin staff? You've got your finance folks, your payroll folks, your HR people, your IT people. To what extent are we screening that as well?
So let me jump in on that one, because I think that it's really important in a behavioral health organization to have our people who are supporting the work of the behavioral organization understand the product that we're selling. And I think that it's really dangerous when we separate our administrative and management staff from the culture and values of the work that we're doing. And so when screening our administrative staff, I think it's just as important to move forward with these kinds of things that we're talking about flexibility, belief in people, understanding, as it is with our direct care staff. Of course, you may not be asking them about their particular recovery focused practice, but you would be asking them about how they fit into a team, what kind of work they had before in the nonprofit sector, what that experience was like.
Yeah,
I could. Things to add, I'm sure.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, you're trying to establish an environment, a culture. Obviously, I spent my career in HR, in a healthcare setting. HR doesn't deliver direct services, and I've hired lots of administrative people. You still have you have to hire people that understand what it is that your organization does and that is sensitive to what your organization does. Because, you have a lot of these, I mean, frankly, a lot of the departments you're talking about or the areas you're talking about are support areas. They're there to support what the organization is doing. You have to get people that buy into, the concept and buy into the culture that you're trying to establish. I did see a question pop up. Do you want me to answer it?
I don't think we have any time.
Okay.
I want to be respectful of that. I would like to offer up, if MCTAC is open to this, that we'll take additional questions and we can respond to something in writing. There's some great questions about people who are not able to learn new technology, about how do we onboard in this new virtual environment, about how do we retain staff when we don't have the flexibility around compensation. And probably one of the most relevant to right now is about trusting your gut leading to implicit bias. All of those are great questions that I really would like to answer, but we don't have the time. So hopefully we can do this in writing. I just wanted to mention again that the slides, recording, and supplemental resource will be mailed out and will be available on CTAC in the next few days. And also to come join us on July 30th, when we're going to be talking about organizational culture, and some of these same questions that people are bringing up will be addressed then in greater detail. And then again, keep an eye on the schedule for the August, September, and October offerings. Thank you all very much for attending. We're excited to have really started off this conversation and look forward to continuing to work with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.